Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin, guilty on all 3 charges for the murder of George Floyd.
And we've been bringing you sports reaction from across the country, but let's get you the reaction from George Floyd's family the moment they heard the verdicts come down.
Same caption, verdict count 3. Industry involving Matter count 3. Second manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk. Find the defendant guilty.
Stand by. Are we going on TV or is this just digital?
So that was the reaction from George Floyd's family as they found out that Derek Chauvin had been convicted on all charges. Billie Jean King tweeting this: "Today, justice was served for George Floyd. His loved ones can hopefully sleep easier. The time to collectively examine the treatment of black people, in particular black boys/men, by some law enforcement is long overdue. The path to healing must begin." Hashtag Black Lives Matter. We saw John Morant, star of the Grizzlies, tweet justice. And Donovan Mitchell of the Utah Jazz, God is good all the time, as again this reaction coming in from around the sports world. In fact, just moments ago we heard from Brooklyn Nets head coach Steve Nash.
Yeah, it's bittersweet. Obviously, George Floyd lost his life, as many others have, unjustly, and we can't forget that people are losing their lives. On the other hand, it is a small gesture of justice and possibly hope for the future, and that, perhaps all the social justice movements, the NBA, the WNBA, with the community at large, are really making an impact, whether it's, small and creating a tipping point, or whether it's large. I mean, it gives hope that the voices of many are making change, and that we have a better future for our kids. And it is this, in one respect it's relieving, because you don't have a lot of confidence historically that the verdict would come down, and that justice would be served. So I just hope that this is a type of statement by our justice system that gives hope and precedence for these type of verdicts to be the norm.
Malika Andrews joining us now, and Malika, we just heard, and you just heard from Steve Nash. What other reaction have you gathered around the league to this decision by the jury?
Well, I've been hearing sentiments that are very similar to what Steve Nash just said, and I want to highlight one thing that he said when he talked about precedents. So what I've heard in talking to players and coaches and executives around the league is that while they are excited, while they are maybe relieved is a more appropriate word, that this is the verdict that came down, the fact that there was anxiety toward what was going to happen, that was a feeling that not a lot of folks were comfortable with. So there was relief that this was the verdict. I was told by one coach, thank goodness this is the verdict that we all needed to hear. That's the sentiment I've been hearing around the league. So players feel validated in some small way that they were able to help in all of the ways they were speaking out over the last year. But really, it's that piece of precedence that Steve Nash was talking about that now people around the league are hoping to build on. In the Minnesota Timberwolves statement, they talked about how while there is still systemic racism that is happening in our country, we need to continue to pierce through that and to elevate and be better. And so I think the resounding sentiment that I am hearing is that while this is good, it is not good enough, and they're hoping that this is a stepping stone towards something else, towards something bigger, towards a more permanent change.
It is a step. We heard Michael Wilbon talk about that, as well as Stephen A. Smith. It's a day of not really celebration, just relief, at least for a moment as they try to move forward here. Especially, you mentioned the Timberwolves and what's going on just in the suburbs of Minneapolis surrounding Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center. Malika, thank you so much.
And Kevin, we got a statement from the WNBA, obviously a league and organization that has been on the forefront of speaking out and using their platform. Quote, this past year, we've witnessed traumatizing instances of police brutality that Black Americans disproportionately experienced, with the murder of George Floyd at the forefront of the conversation. While this verdict represents a step towards justice, we're reminded that justice is too often not the outcome for people of color. The WNBA/WNBA-PA Social Justice Council will continue its work to combat injustice and inequality in our country and hope this represents a true turning point for how the effects of systemic racism begin to be addressed. We stand with all those who have felt the deep impact of George Floyd's death. Kevin, we're joined now by Stephen A. Smith. And Stephen A., we have seen for the last year this story intersect with sports in a way that we haven't seen maybe ever. Why do you think this resonated in the sports world the way that it did?
Well, because when you see a black man helpless on the ground, cuffed, and already under control, and you still keep a knee on his neck while bystanders are literally begging you to get off of him, and you literally look in their direction and completely ignore them, and you stay there for 9 minutes and 29 seconds as a black man is on the pavement. Any man, any woman, any human being is on the pavement literally calling for their mother, and you did not care. I mean, when you talk about it from that perspective and you put it in those direct terms, it's something that black folks feel have been felt about them for quite a long time, centuries to be quite honest with you, but more directly, definitely still in the modern day era. When you look at it from that perspective and you see the disregard that he had for this black man's life, no regard whatsoever while people were standing by and begging him to get off of him and allow him to breathe. You knew that something had to be done. We've seen many situations that have taken place. We've heard about Breonna Taylor. We've seen Ahmaud Arbery and how he was shot in the back, although that wasn't from a police officer. We've seen a multitude of things, heinous things that have happened at the hands of law enforcement officials, the Eric Garners of the world, the Michael Browns and others that black folks would point to. And time again, we found ourselves asking, as Doc Rivers, then the coach of the Los Angeles Clippers, now the head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, put in its proper perspective. We've loved this country for so long. When is the country going to love us back? And unfortunately, far too many black folks have felt that we've never been loved, we've never been respected, we've never been valued. As a matter of fact, we've been demonized, particularly black men. And when you see that kind of stuff transpiring, it offers validation to it, which is why the sports world stood up and said enough. Obviously, LeBron James, he was wearing an I Can't Breathe t-shirt similar to what Eric Garner had chanted. And now, obviously, George Floyd. There were various others. Dwayne Wade spoke out. Jaylen Brown and Malcolm Brogdon led protests along with Russell Westbrook and Trey Young and others. The sports where Steve Kerr spoke out adamantly against it. T.J. Watt spoke out adamantly against it. Because anybody that was a human being that saw that video knew. You also have to remember the backdrop in the 90s when Rodney King was beaten within an inch of his life by numerous police officers. And somehow, some way, those officers got off. These are the kind of things that led, in a lot of black people's mind, to what transpired with George Floyd. This notion that you could get away with murdering a black man and nobody would care. And so this needed to happen. Obviously, he's been convicted on all 3 charges. It's measuring up to 75 years imprisonment. The next phase is twofold as far as I'm concerned. And I'll speak on behalf of a lot of people by saying this, Al. Number one, make sure if one charge carries 40 years and the other charge carries 25 years and the other charge carries 10 years. Last time I checked, my math says that's 75 years. Make sure Derek Chauvin gets 75 years. That's number one. And number two, let's not forget the other officers that were involved. There were 2 other officers laying on the legs of George Floyd. They were helping Derek Chauvin to restrain him as if he needed help. And then there was another officer that was keeping bystanders at bay who were pleading with the officers to get off of George Floyd. They may not need to pay with 75 years in prison, but make no mistake about it, they need to pay as well. And we're watching them too, just like we just finished watching Derek Chauvin get what he so richly deserved.
You know, Stephen A., let me tell you what sort of I'm watching as I see some of these images and pictures that are coming in from the verdict. I'm seeing a community take a huge sigh of relief today.
Yes.
Right? To just, like, but they're doing that as they also understand that we are preparing for yet another one of these situations in Dante Wright, who was shot by police, and that police officer has been charged, and so we're staring down another trial. When it comes to the sports world, after what they were able to do over this past year because of what happened to George Floyd, how do you think moving forward their power can reverberate in cases like Dante Wright's?
Well, first of all, let's applaud these professional athletes who obviously have financial resources, not to mention cachet in the world of social media and beyond, in terms of making sure to give a voice to the voiceless and ensuring that that reaches millions. That goes a long way, because remember, if it were not for the numerous protests that were taking place in the streets of America, as well as globally, I might add, internationally, if it were not for that, who knows how soon it would have been before this trial actually took place. So we've got to take that into consideration as well, the level of urgency, because the initial, according to the reports, if you look at the initial phase of all of this, the local prosecutors were doing an incredibly incompetent job of